With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, hanging out with SJ, and we have back for another episode Chenet and Gary Barkalow, and we're exploring the elder sage stage in the masculine journey. Last week, we talked about who that is, who they aren't, what does that look like, maybe some of the things that are challenging amongst culture. And I'm sure we're going to get into some more of that in this session, because what we want to talk about is the wounding that elders and sages feel, the woundings that they carry. And I think it's an obvious beginning. And in the second half of this podcast, we want to talk about healing. What's redemption look like for them? Okay, so that's where we're going to go today. And I think the obvious place to start before we kind of move into particulars is, anything unhealed in a man's life, anything that's not yet been given to God for healing is quite literally wounding in this stage. So if father wounds from his boyhood, or mother wounds, or coach wounds from high school, or even assaults in any way, molestings, things that happened in his boyhood, if those haven't been grieved, if those haven't been brought to Jesus to bring healing, that's going to be evident, present, somehow, like it would be in any stage. It just goes with you, right? And if it's unhealed, untreated, then yes, that man is unfinished in some way, unfathered. We talked about that, Gary, last time, about he's a father to many. Well, if he hasn't been fathered by God in the healing that God offers from the wounding experiences that we've had, it's going to be hard for him to father well in this stage. So what's been your experience, Gary and Jim, in kind of the wounding that we associate with this stage, either bringing it in or even the wounding that can happen in this stage?
I'm talking with a young man in another state, and he is now at a church, working at a church. And he really looked forward to this. The lead pastor who hired him, he looked forward to being mentored by this man, working with him, being a part of what this man had built. And now, after a short amount of time, as we're talking, he's just saying that this man won't meet with him. He keeps, talking to him, saying, "Can we get together? I really need to understand, what is it you want me to do? And what is it we're about?" And he just won't meet with them. I don't have time for this, or ignores his emails and that type of thing. Mm. And then recently, they started talking about some of the issues that most ministries and churches are facing right now. What do we do with COVID? What do we do with masks? What do we do with people that won't wear them? What do we do about gatherings? And it just turned into, in a moment, to a heated conversation to where this older man was calling this friend of mine, this younger man, names. "Oh, you're such a millennial," or "you're an anti-vaxxer." And when I was hearing the story, I'm thinking, this man is in his early 70s and he's resorting to name calling, and he will not mentor this younger man who wants to be mentored and brought along. And first of all, I'm saddened for my friend and a little bit angry for my friend, but I am more saddened by this man's life. And I'm thinking, I would love to know this man's story, because this makes no sense for this man, none. And he is known, this man, this pastor, as someone who fought his previous church from going in a very bad direction, and eventually had to leave that church because he just could not let it go where it was going, and they refused to stay on course. So he was very heroic, but then to hear the story, I'm thinking, oh, there's something back in there, and this does not make sense. So again, there's all, as you're saying, there's all this woundedness that has accumulated and made him into what he is today and not what he should be today. Mm.
We talk in every stage that we talk about the effect of woundedness. And there's no question that unless we resolve those wounds, that we carry them on with us. But what comes to my mind when you ask that question, Michael, is the new wounds, the wounds that a guy gets at 65 when he's forced to retire,
Mm.
or the wounds he gets when, he's not kept up on the latest technology and somebody talks about some term that he doesn't understand. And as Gary mentioned earlier, looks down their nose at him because he's so out of touch, or the wounds that he feels when he doesn't have the energy or the health that he had earlier in life. So in addition to all those early stage wounds, there are a lot of wounds that come later in life as well that need to be dealt with.
Yeah. Gary, we're going to have to put that in the gap year curriculum. It's kind of the preparation, right? When to be able to deal with health issues, because there's more of them in later stages. Or if it's not you, it's your friends. It can be your spouse. That can be really hard. I mean, our friends aren't passing away, Jim and Gary, in their 50s, but you get on the other side of 70, you're going to some funerals. You're experiencing loss at different weights and measure. Paul Stanley, like you mentioned in the last episode. So that's real. I think of another one, Jim, financially, where they are in that stage. Man, look at the things the enemy has to come calling. If they've got this untreated history, that's one thing. And then they have this undefendable current reality. That is a force coming at a man in his elder sage years for sure.
Michael, 3 words I'd put about this elder stage as I'm listening to you all talk, and that is, we talked about this idea of humility should be true of really of everyone, but especially true of an elder sage. The other is generosity. And I don't mean just financially, but generously giving to others around you, your perspective, your encouragement, as you talk about in your book, validation. All of these things, there should be generosity and there should be connectedness. Obviously, that generosity can't happen without connectedness. And as we said in the previous episode, there tends to be this idea of isolation happens, right? If we feel like we're looked down upon, if we feel like we don't have a place anymore, and everyone's telling us that with words or without words, then we start to isolate. Well, you can't be generous if you're isolating. And I know of guys that would say, I don't really know what I have to give or who to give it to. And every time I hear that, then I start asking them questions about their friendships and their social involvement. And what I find is they're not very socially involved. They don't have many friendships, and most of their family aren't around, because I thought, if you are connected relationally, then you are seeing needs all the time. The question isn't, do I have something to give and just somebody needs something from me? It's just, where do I give it? Because I'm seeing all these needs, because I'm connected. So that's the hard thing about isolation, self-imposed or culturally imposed, because then you can't be generous.
Yeah, that's good. SJ, you leaning in. You have something?
The greatest irreplaceable commodity in our world is time. And so none of us are guaranteed a certain amount of time, and none of us get any more than we're given. And so, and we all have 24 hours a day and 168 hours in a week. And so when I hear you talk about generosity, Gary, and the wisdom and things that you were talking about that are shared, for a man to share time with me, and take the time to listen to my story, listen to what's going on in my life, and listen to the areas of my life into which he could speak. I was thinking about this podcast the other day, and my son just turned 26 years old. And so thank the Lord, we have the kind of relationship where when he doesn't know what to do, he calls me and we talk things through, and I mostly listen. But as we were getting ready for this Elder Sage podcast, I'm thinking, man, I need that. And you guys have been that for me, no question. But I need that. And as I go fully into the king stage, I just turned 50. I need it more and more. And I think there's some misconception that as you get older, you need less and less interaction with others and wisdom from others. And you should have all your shiz figured out by now, and it's just not true. We need each other. As a matter of fact, the weightiness of the decisions I have to make in this king stage and moving through the king stage, I think there's more weight to them almost as you get older and into that stage. So the need for wisdom, the need for generosity of time is greater than ever, I think.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. We got a few minutes left on this side of the wounding and healing session, but I want to acknowledge that, you talked about Paul Stanley, and people recognized that he had come in the room. I think that can be a great source of wounding as well, to not be recognized.
Mhm.
And you can tell this in a wounded elder sage because they try to be.
Yeah.
They either are hiding or not showing up at all, or the wounded elder sage is the guy trying to be, almost demanding so. And it's hard to watch when you experience somebody. If this comes out of their mouth soon, quickly, well, you know what you should do. Or, well, if I were you, that's kind of broken elder sage. And he still really needs to be heard, because somewhere in there, how far back? It might be back to boyhood. Boom, that's in place. But that's how it looks in this stage when there's broken boyhood, or they weren't allowed to risk and engage and explore. They weren't allowed to be explorers, and so they play it safe. Any advice an elder sage gives is actually suspect for examination, right, of wounding. What you ought to do is play it really safe. A government job is always a great way to go. You get a pendant.
Look at the story of Job.
Advice based on his story, that's a broken cistern. That's a wounded heart. But if the elder sage is continuing, like I know both of you do, Gary, and it just happened to me this afternoon with you, Michael, you said something. Maybe we should talk about that. If they are looking for clues, if they are investigators, if they are trying to more figure out where you really are, not because you've shared 2 minutes with them, but they know that there is deeper water, and they know how to paddle against that current and against those waves to get out to the deeper water of another man's heart. Come on, man. But if that's never been done for them, it's going to be very challenging for them to do it. And then it just perpetuates the wound, right? Nobody ever listens to me. They never do what I say. I mean, those are cries of the wounded elder sage heart for sure.
Or the other side of that, Michael, is the older man who never speaks up. He won't participate. If you ask him a question, he'll say, I don't know, or give a yes or no answer, and you're thinking, well, you have far more to say. It's either hiding or dominating, right? Would be maybe the different sides of that brokenness, that woundedness.
Yeah. So when we come back, let's talk about the stories of healing. What have we seen what have you guys experienced in your life? And what are we seeing in terms of what God wants to do with that elder sage heart? So we'll be right back on the Exploring More podcast. Just a minute.
Hey listeners, it's SJ. Just want to give you an update on upcoming events in 2021. The purpose of Zoe events is to create a safe space where men, women, and couples can encounter God, experience Him in wonderfully intimate ways, and enter into life-changing transformation. We want to invite you to get away with God, unplug from all the noise, the busyness, and the demands of everyday routine, and invite Jesus to take you through your story. The moments or seasons in your life that He wants to heal and restore in order to shape you more fully into who you truly are. That happens over and over again throughout the Bible. Regular folks encounter an incredible God, experience His love, and they are never the same. We have 3 events coming up in 2021. March 18th through the 21st is our Heart of a Warrior Allies Advanced Weekend. April 8th through the 11th is the Women's Deepening Weekend. And then April 29th through May 2nd is the Heart of a Warrior Encounter for Men. Visit zoe.org/events for more information.
Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast, talking about elders and sages and talking about the woundedness that can happen either carried in to this stage of the masculine journey. We're talking about men in their 60s. That's kind of when the transition happens, 60s, 70s, 80s, these last decades of, what did you say, Jim? You've said it from stage many times. I want to finish well. I want to finish well. Every time you say that, I go, whoa, he knows that there's less sand up top and more sand at the bottom. And so if wounding is prevalent in every stage, and it is, what does healing look like in this stage? What's been your all's experience regarding God saying, this is enough. I keep showing you these things and I want to get your attention and invite you away to tend to this. What have you experienced as you have experienced the love of God bringing healing to either your past or to some of these things you guys mentioned in the first half of the podcast?
Well, we're constantly walking with God and asking him to bring to mind things that are in the way of our relationship. And so that healing in general is constant. But I know I experienced what Gary talked about earlier, and that is when I, quote unquote, retired from my business job, the phone stopped ringing, the emails stopped coming. Nobody cared about my opinion anymore or the customers that I was going to bring. It didn't happen immediately. It was kind of over time, but that was a wounding moment. And even though I had had experience with Zoe, the masculine journey, heard about the sage stage, until you experience it, how I've handled that, I think, is by talking about it, talking to people, talking to God. So I think there's some value in just awareness. Somebody needs to tell these men that their glory, their calling does not end when they retire. There is an opportunity. So some of it is simply awareness and somebody letting somebody else know. A lot of it, as we've said, is walking with God. Some of it's talking to other people. We have a great sage in our community, Barry Strickland. And Barry Strickland would say, this is not rocket science. He said, the most important thing you could do as a sage is give someone your presence. Be present. So you take little nuggets like that. And as you know, Michael, well, from your writing, the more writing you do, the more thinking you have to do and the more analyzing. And so as I write these pages of notes and figure out, how that affected me or what happened to me, there was no huge breakthrough. It's just a whole lot of little things is what I'm saying.
You were talking about, Jim, about your writing now and how writing makes you analyze. And,
right.
Let me just throw out this idea, which we talk about this all the time in Zoe, this idea, the importance of journaling or writing, right? What's going on in your life? What is God saying? What are you processing? Again, with that phrase that an editor of my first book told me, said that writing forces us to detangle our thoughts through our fingers. That's really living an examined life. That's the great thing about writing. And I would just tell people, don't think about writing to get a book published, just write and see what comes out of that later. But yeah, as I'm hearing you, one of the practices that I have been doing in the last couple of years, which was not part of my younger years at all, but now at night when I go to bed, I will spend usually, 10 or 15 minutes laying in bed before I fall asleep. I just think about my day. And it really is a time for me of being really quiet. I have no pressure. I'm by myself. And I can think about, the things that got me upset during that day, the ways I'm not the man I wish I was at this point in my life. And it doesn't feel condemning. It's not shaming. It's just evaluating my life, a place to then pray and say, Jesus, I want you to address this in my life. I just don't want this to be true anymore. I want to grow in this. But it's very hard to battle or grow in an area we're unaware of. I just find that's an important part of my life now, is to evaluate my day just about every night. And again, not looking for what's wrong, but just the areas I want to grow in or the things that I aspire to that I'm not actually working in at this point. I'm just avoiding. And to bring that up to you, I realize that when I am living in my false self, wounds, past maybe unhealed or partially wounds, are speaking to me. I see three things that are the telltale signs of that. One is anger, when I have to say to myself, man, why did that make me so mad? Why did that comment bother me? Or whatever it is. The second is avoiding, right? I just want to get out of this as quick as I can. The conversation, the thought, the confrontation, the relationship, the task. There's plenty of tasks I'm avoiding, and it usually goes to my fear. And I think, this is ridiculous. I'm old enough to know how to do this. And then the other thing is aggressiveness. So anger, avoiding, and aggressiveness. When I get overly aggressive, in Christian terms, we talk about this as striving.
Yeah.
I know something's really wrong. Something else is motivating me. None of those things are good for anyone, but especially for an older man, they're inappropriate.
I think about as a king in this stage, and I know, SJ, you're stepping into that too. I really appreciate being reminded about reflection we've been exploring this thing that we'll have to do a podcast on, the 3 mile per hour Godspeed, and moving at 3 miles per hour. That's how fast a man walks. A mile is 3 miles per hour. Man, I think the elders and sages would be, not because they can't run a 10-second 100-yard dash or 40. I mean, this is the rhythm of the kingdom. Back to Gandalf, right? A wizard shows up right at the perfect time, right? He's never late and he's never early. It's when he arrives, right?
It makes me think, Michael, of when you bring up Gandalf, I was already thinking about it, but he's a great example. What is the implement that Gandalf wields?
Yeah, the staff, yeah.
He's got a walking stick, his staff. I wonder if, to your point, it's not that you can't necessarily run a 50-yard dash anymore, but you understand there's a pace to life, and it's okay to walk and not be the one that has to run and prove and strive and be out in front in this stage.
Yeah. The healing for this stage is no different than the healing of any other stage. It's time, it's quiet, it's reflection. And, that 15 minutes, at the end of the day, to just reflect on the day. Where was I? What did I do? To me, that's contemplative. It's giving intentional thoughts to, hey, these last sands are up in there, and even to ask God questions. I think of a friend of God who's an elder and a sage. He's asking God, he's asking his heart. What have we heard from Tom Benner for years? I think it's a Shakespeare quote, to go to your bosom, go to your heart, to the door of your heart and knock and enter there and take the inventory. Those are wonderful. I've seen men at our conferences, and I know Gary at the calling retreats, and I've seen elders and I've seen the sages who are in that timeline, but I have seen them weep. I've heard them tell stories of encounters and meeting with God that touched spaces, well back in their masculine journey. What would your advice, right? I already said earlier, be careful from the guys. Here's what I'd do. Or here's what you ought to do. But I know you'll handle this question well. What would be your encouragement to men in this stage, or men who know this can be their fathers, right? Some of the men may be in their circles, in allies type circles. We just heard about one in Greg's who was just so grateful. He'd never been a part of a circle like this in his 60 some years of church. Remember what he said, Jim? To be known, I know you guys more in less than 2 years than I've known my small group that I've been a part of for 6. I remember, and he was an elder, right? But what would some of the encouragement be? The journaling and the reflection, the writing things down, those are good. Any other healing postures, healing practices? Jim, you talked about sharing, and how you sharing your heart, being known still.
I'm assuming that they've been through our advance and talked about glory and calling, and again, need to be reminded that doesn't end just because your role as a business guy ended, that your calling continues, and that if they don't know what that is, they should find that out. Again, it's, walking with God in all of this.
Yeah.
There's a certain courage that, we talked about humility a lot. There's also a certain courage that's required. If you guys have ever tried to hook up mentors and mentees, you know that the mentee will say, well, I didn't ask him because I didn't think he wanted to mentor me. And the mentors will say, well, I didn't ask him because I didn't think he needed a mentor or wanted me to mentor him. So it takes a certain courage to step into another man's life, because as we know, that can be exciting, demanding, interesting, messy, right? And so there's an encouragement to take that step of faith and ask somebody, hey, man, it looks like you're struggling with some things. Why don't you and I get together and talk about it? And that takes some courage. And of course, during the talking, there's got to be the humility, but there's that combination of humility and courage.
Yeah.
Time with God.
No, I don't know any healing that can take place in strict isolation or only in being alone with God. I think you're talking about part of the healing process that comes through the engagement of dialogue, of conversation. And we know this. You've got to be careful. It can go south. It's messy, but to have oriented men, I think we'll talk about this on the next episode, just about the dynamic of this, the goodness of this. But Gary, Jim talked about something that maybe you're new to the podcast, or maybe, you need to go back and get some of the podcasts on glory when we've talked before and you've been with us, Gary. But, you don't retire from your calling, right? If you'll take it from here, roles and assignments are different. Could you explain that just a little bit and how important that's got to be for every stage, but especially the elder stage?
Yeah. So as we talk about, like I said, in the advance, everyone has an aspect that they have a glory to their life. And to be biblically accurate, it's an aspect of the glory of God that we have in us as one who dwells in us, and we are conformed to his image and so on. And everyone has this. Well, the older we get, the more years we spend walking with God, the more that glory, the weightiness increases. It should increase.
Mm-hmm.
It should become clear. It should become more honed. And so, you don't reach an age where now it goes in the other direction. It doesn't. It continues to grow, to deepen, to be more unveiled, if you will. And scripture talks about it's an ever increasing glory in our life. So that is always there. And we need to continue to offer that. Now, so many people feel like when their formal roles have been taken away from them, or they've walked away from them, as far as their job or maybe a position in the church or whatever that is, they feel like they've lost that now and they've lost a part of themselves. They haven't. And in some ways, they become more free with the glory of their life. So, you just have to understand that and then start asking the question, God, how do I offer this now to others? So, Michael, to address that. So, right, we talk about that in everyone's life, everyone has three aspects to their life. One is there's the glory of their life, the weightiness, the calling, the effect of their life, God-given effect. There are the roles in their life. We all live in this world. So we have the role of a child if our parents are still alive, if we're married, of being a spouse, if we have children, being a parent, if we work for someone, being an employee, or if we have our own corporation, we're an employer, and so on. There are roles in our life, but we also have assignments that God has given us, right? Where he says, I want you to take the glory, the weightiness of your life, the effect of your life over to this place, because it is needed for what the kingdom of God is doing. And it's also needed for you. God is always doing that. He's always up to developing our calling, the glory of our life, as well as our character. He's always doing those two things because they're linked together. And so he'll give us assignments in our life where he'll say, you need to take who you are and offer that in this place to those people. But at the same time, I'm going to be providing for you. It might be financially, it might be training, it might be friendship, whatever it is, he's providing something at the same time. And so it's very important to keep those in mind, that those are operating. And again, the reason I think this is important, especially as we're talking about elder sages, is that our assignments often change. Again, whether it's foisted on us, we've been laid off, or the company's gone down, or we're just retiring, or we make a choice to do it. And all that's happened is our assignment has changed. We've not changed. Right. It's just now we are bringing who we are to a different place, maybe to a different group of people, and in a different way.
Yeah, that's a great characteristic of an elder sage who has experienced some healing. They know that their life is more than their business card or what used to sit on their desk or the plaques that represent those years. Just ran into a guy a week or so ago who he's in these elder sage years and he needed to still work. So he took a job at Lowe's. I love that. That's who I want to see on the aisles at Lowe's. I want to see a guy who could tell me a thing or two about a thing or two, man. Yeah. But he was telling me about how he gets to help these younger guys, because there's some other guys in the employee world at Lowe's that are younger guys punching the clock. They got a job, and he sees it as a place for him to father. And so very, very fascinating ideas. And I want to talk about this just a little bit more. I think it's a great setup for the next session. And what does it look like? What do they do? and you need to be healed, right? You need to be in the game of becoming wholehearted with the help of God and with other oriented men. We champion that, SJ. I mean, that is one of the best benefits of my role, my assignment, my glory in the job that I'm in with Zoe, is that's part of the benefit package. I get to talk to guys like you. I get to hear from guys like you. I get to be in the company of men like you it has an effect on me, inviting me to more, not diminishing me where I'm at, but inviting me to more. And it keeps it in front of me. And I'm grateful for that. Grateful.
Yeah, speaking of more, Michael, and I would affirm that that's one of the great benefits of being on the team at Zoe. But Jim and Gary, I want to hear more specifically on, I heard you say something a few minutes ago, Gary, that men are often in this stage more free to operate in the context of their glory. So in our next episode, I want to hear a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, man. I knew it would take us into 30 more minutes. So I'm going to break the second session off and let our listeners go. And hey, you can find us on all the podcast platforms. One of the things I want to encourage you, whichever one you're listening to us, man, those reviews are helpful, helps other people find us. It's a great way to kind of spread the encouragement around, send an invitation. Just so any kind of rating or reviewing that you can do on any of your podcast platforms, please jump in and do that.
Yeah, share us too. Share us on social media. You spread the love around. You got questions or comments for us, as always, email us at exploringmore@zoe.org, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.